You probably already know that I've been building this abomination, which I'm calling a Fulgorian harp, which is basically a robotic version of an Aeolian harp. It's basically a box with some guitar strings on it. And the strings are played by electromagnetic sustainers, which can vibrate the strings without touching them. And perhaps calling this a robot is a bit bold, because based on what I've already shown you in previous videos, I might classify this as being more of some kind of electronic musical instrument rather than a robot. But today I really want to take the final few steps to elevate this to the status of really being a robot. And in doing so, I want to talk about some of the things that I see as being the difference between a musical instrument and a musical robot. And just to be clear, I'm not trying to gatekeep what other people are allowed to call robots. Obviously, there are a lot more considerations than what I'm going to talk about today, but I just want to talk about some of the things that I like to think about while I'm working on my own projects. And in fact, for me, the holy grail of this type of project is for a person to be able to actually improvise music together with the robot. But first things first, since my last video, I've actually done a lot of fine-tuning. So I completely redesigned and rebuilt these little brackets that hold the sustainers on. I got rid of the clamps that were holding everything together. And I generally just tried to solidify everything to get rid of all of the rattling that I was in denial about in my last video. I put hinges on here. At some point I realized that I had misassembled some of the sustainers, which explained a lot, so I fixed that. I completely reworked the bridges because this little rounded one I had on here sucked. So this is working a lot better now, but that's not robotics, that's instrument building. And so the first issue pertaining to robots is that the microcontroller kind of knows that this is sustainer number 0, and this is sustainer number 1, and sustainer number 2, and so forth. And it knows how to turn the sustainers on and off, but it doesn't know anything about the guitar strings or how they're tuned. So it doesn't know what note is going to sound when it turns on sustainer number 2. So to fix that, I plugged this microcontroller into my laptop, and I also put this contact mic on the robot and plugged that into my laptop. And then I built this interface, and right now I'm just looking at the numbers that are printed on this keyboard. So if I click on number 2, that turns on sustainer number 2. And then because I have the contact mic hooked up, this thing down here tells me how the corresponding string is actually tuned. It's a G sharp. And that's useful, first because it helps me tune the strings. And then once the string is tuned, I can also capture that note. And that saves this in a little file on the microcontroller. So now the robot knows that sustainer number 2 controls G sharp, MIDI note number 56, or 3 cents flat of that. And that's useful because I've programmed this in such a way that now if I switch my keyboard to MIDI channel number 2, then I can turn on note number 56, G sharp, and if any of the robot's strings are tuned to that note, then it will play it. And I don't need to worry about which actual sustainer that is. And I also did this thing where if I use MIDI channel 3 on my keyboard, then pressing any G sharp on the keyboard will turn on all of the G sharps on the robot, which is going to make it easier to play chords later. And the reason that this is important from a robotics perspective is that if you consider my laptop as part of this robot, this gives the robot a certain degree of self-awareness. It has the ability to play its own strings and figure out how those strings are tuned by listening to itself. It can discover things about itself through observation. The ability to self-monitor is important enough that recently Sabina Hassenfelder said that she thinks that it's one of 2 prerequisites for a machine to become conscious. But perhaps the big limitation here is that often in robotics, you want sensors and actuators connected together in a feedback loop. So here I have a sensor, the contact mic, and I have actuators, the sustainers that actually play the strings, and the sensor hears what the actuators are doing, but the actuators don't care about the sensor. The robot doesn't play anything different based on what it hears. So I really only kind of have half of a feedback loop here. But anyway, the ability to discover and remember its own tuning, at least in my mind, is a big step away from being a musical instrument and towards being a musical robot. The next thing I want to discuss is that in my previous video, I showed that I can tell the robot which notes to play and it will play them. But all musical instruments can do that, but now I want my robot to play autonomously. I want it to figure out on its own what notes it's going to play without me having to tell it. So I came up with this algorithm where the robot will play a random triad and sustain it for a while before transitioning to a new random triad. But the new triad will always have 2 notes in common with the previous one. So basically just one note moves at a time. And you'll also see that the new note always turns on a few seconds before the old one turns off. And that's to compensate for the fact that it takes a few seconds for the string to start audibly vibrating. So here's what that sounds like. Yeah, I really like that. I realize not everybody has the same taste as me, but I actually find that to be very soothing and peaceful. There's something very dreamlike about it. And I also feel like it sort of captures this quality about Aeolian harps, where the sound is on the one hand very static, but on the other hand it's slowly and gradually changing almost imperceptibly over time. And as far as robotics are concerned, just to be clear, I'm not claiming that the robot is being creative and composing music on its own. If anything, I think of this as being an act of meta-composition, meaning that I still think of myself as being the composer. Even though I didn't compose every single note, I composed the process, and the robot fills out that process with random numbers as it runs. But again, the drawback with this example is that it's really just half of a feedback loop. Yes, I have actuators that are playing the strings, but there's not really any sensor. The robot's not listening to anything or sensing anything or changing how it plays based on what it senses in the environment. It's kind of just doing its own thing and ignoring its environment. Nevertheless, to me, the ability to realize a meta-composition or to execute an algorithm is another clear step away from this being a musical instrument and towards being a musical robot. So now I'd like to actually be able to play music with the robot. And of course, that's easy. I mean, I can just listen to a regular audio recording and play along with that. But I really want my robot also to listen to me and to play along with me. And I'm going to do that using guitar chord classification. And what I mean by that is I want to be able to strum a chord on my guitar and have the robot listen to me and figure out which chord I'm playing and then use that to inform its own playing. So I did that using the algorithm described in this paper. And luckily I had a student working on this a few years ago with some of my other robots. So I just stole his code and made a pretty interface for it. And I moved the contact mic over to my guitar. And so now, just to test this algorithm out, I'm going to strum some chords. And if you look at the interface, right here, you'll see what chord the algorithm thinks that I'm playing. So here's E major. Not sure why it thinks there's a major seventh in there, but here's A minor, D major, D major 7, D7, D minor 7, here's D diminished 7, D half diminished 7, and then here's a D augmented. Yeah, so that actually works quite well. It basically got all of those correct. And in general, when it is wrong, it's usually just wrong by one note, but that one note usually still sounds good with whatever I am playing. And I actually like that because it means that when I'm playing with the robot might occasionally play something that I don't expect, but that I still like. And that might inspire me to go off and play something different than what I might have otherwise played. And in fact, I frequently think about the failure mode of these algorithms that I'm using. When the algorithm fails, does it produce garbage? Or does it produce something that could potentially be musically interesting? And in this case, I would almost say when the algorithm makes a mistake, it's almost more interesting than when it gets the chord correct. And the only drawback about this algorithm is that it doesn't update very quickly. It takes almost a second to identify a chord, so it wouldn't catch really fast chord changes. But in my case, my robot doesn't turn notes on and off that quickly anyway, so this is going to be just fine for what I need. Okay, so now I'm going to connect this interface back up to my robot, and I'm going to play some chords, and the robot is going to play the same chord that it thinks that I'm playing. Actually, first I'm just going to play some individual notes on the guitar so you can hear the robot more clearly, but the algorithm still treats those as chords. Wow, that really warms my cockles. I always wanted to be a one-note wonder. I was originally annoyed by how long it takes the strings to start vibrating after you turn them on, but in this context, I actually really like it. I really like how the robot kind of comes in gradually and swells and grows and swirls around and blossoms. It really gives the music a sort of momentum. I mean, I just spent almost a minute just playing 2 notes, but it kind of turned into a whole miniature composition. Okay, so now I'm going to play some actual chords, and you should know that I couldn't resist adding a little melody over the top of this in post, but you're supposed to pay attention to the strumming and to the robot as you listen. Wow, Mini Mike really got carried away there. But for the sake of this discussion, I'm just talking about the strumming, which I played in real time with the robot. And I actually spent a long time kind of messing around and improvising and practicing and recording different takes. And the robot really behaves differently every single time in terms of how long it takes for the notes to get going and which notes you start to hear first and how it misinterprets the chords that I'm playing and all of that. And that really forces me to listen to the robot and change what I'm doing based on what I hear. Like, for example, if I'm really trying to create a big crescendo, but the robot's coming in slowly, then I might sit on the current chord for a couple of more measures just to give the robot time to start making more sound. Or like in this example, I was playing a 7th chord and the robot kept interpreting it as a diminished 7th chord, and I heard that and I actually really liked it, so I ended up adding a minor 9th into that chord, which is kind of the union between the 7th chord and the diminished 7th chord. And I only did it because I heard the robot doing something like that. And so this example really has the full feedback loop. The robot listens to me and follows what I'm doing, and I also listen to the robot and follow what the robot's doing. And that's why I consider this kind of thing to be the holy grail of these kinds of robots, because it really has that complete feedback loop and I'm part of that loop. So I really am making music collaboratively with the robot. And this is also just really fun to play music with. Like, it just really makes me happy to play a chord and then hear this kind of miniature orchestra swelling up behind me and blossoming. It's funny that for a lot of people, I think that robotics is really about locomotion. Like, a robot is a computer that can walk around. In fact, I know that I've had colleagues in the past who just refuse to acknowledge this type of thing as being a robot because it's sessile. It just sits there. But for me, robotics is all about behavior. It's about the ability to interact intelligently with people and things in its environment. And for me, this is exactly the type of behavior that I like and that I find the most interesting. And so to me, this really goes right to the heart of what robotics is. Anyway, I guess that's all I have to say about that for now. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and all that. You know, my videos don't get a lot of attention on YouTube. At the same time, there are a lot of really obnoxious videos that do get a lot of attention on YouTube. So if you like my content, please vote for it by liking it, subscribing, leaving comments, interacting with it, and just generally letting the algorithm know that you want more of this. And that would also really help me out. But yeah, anyway, I guess that's it. So I'll see you next time. Bye.